Hey there, it's Andrea, and welcome to the Voice of Influence podcast. Today we're going to do something that's actually quite different than we've done before because if you notice the last couple of episodes, 2 episodes ago, so 352, we replayed this remix of an interview that I did with Anna LeBaron and Ruth Warner, who are authors of memoirs because they escaped a violent polygamist cult. And so when Ruth was coming out with her memoir, Anna reached out to her and just kind of wanted to be a part of her book launch, didn't even realize who she was, did not know her. And then come to find out that they were actually cousins and that Anna's father had Ruth's father killed. And it's very dramatic. And it is dramatic. It's not sensationalized. It is a crazy story. So back then, when we first aired this episode, it was in 2017. It was actually episode 7 and 8 of the two of them talking with me for the first time, doing an interview together. They went on to do another interview with Jen Hatmaker together on her show For the Love podcast. Now, here we are a few years later. So much more has happened. I interviewed Anna again because she's a dear friend, and she was a part of the Hulu docuseries Daughters of the Cult, which was about her family. And if you might have seen that when it came out in 2024. But it is still available on Hulu and highly recommended if you're interested in things like this. So I interviewed Anna again, and that was last episode, 253. And in that conversation, she and I talked for a very long time. And because there was so much to talk about, and so much of this is important and relevant to having a voice of influence, to being able to put yourself in a position mentally, spiritually, physically, relationally, to be able to help shape the future. So we had this great conversation, but in the midst of that conversation, she brought up a lot of interesting references that I was like, "Ooh, we need to do like a reflection to provide more context for all of the things that she referenced." And as I was thinking about that, of course, my thoughts came to Roseanne Moore, who she has been involved with Voice of Influence for a very, very long time. We've done a number of episodes around healing from abuse, recognizing abuse and abusive dynamics and things like that. And so I was like, Roseanne, we've got to have a conversation about this because it feels like it's too big of a deal to just air the episode, air the interview, and not really, think a little more reflectively about it and provide more context. So I asked Roseanne to join me. Roseanne, thank you for coming today.
I'm excited. This is good.
Yeah. And Roseanne, let's give the listener a brief overview of you. So you actually have been involved in a religious cult.
Yes, 10 years. I didn't know it at the time. I thought it was just a regular church. But because I had grown up being taught that a cult was based on certain beliefs. And what I came to learn after leaving was that cults are actually defined not simply by ideology, but by control. How people are allowed to function in community with one another. And so you can have a cult that is a totalitarian government like North Korea. You can have a or Nazi Germany. You can have a cult that is a business. We've seen that. There are certain businesses that have been exposed for their cult structures. You can have cults that are religious organizations, and it's not confined to a certain ideology. And you can have families like the LeBarons that function both as a religious and a family cult. It's all about coercive control and control of information and how the dynamics of relationships are set up and punishment and reward.
That's a really important distinction because And one of the things that Anna mentioned in her interview was that when they were getting ready to film Daughters of the Cult docuseries for Hulu, she and her sister were talking about it, and they were like, what is the main thing we really want to get across?
Mm-hmm.
And she said that the main thing they wanted to get across was that, first of all, it is really easy for anybody to be susceptible to cult like conditions and becoming involved in a cult.
Mm-hmm.
And the second piece for them was that they wanted everybody to know that their family, all of their siblings, had renounced their father as the prophet that he had once proclaimed to be, and that none of them believe that anymore. Even people who are now today still in prison for actions and murders that they carried out on their father's behalf, they still now say no, that's not him. So those were the main reasons why she really wanted to do the docuseries, and the main thing that they wanted to communicate. And I know that you also, Roseanne, have said, if you think
Yes.
that you're not susceptible to this, you're probably susceptible more than you think.
Yes, you actually are. There are two primary myths about who gets involved in cults. One is that it's weak, easily influenced people. And the reality is cult groups target, and that's true in a domestic situation too, in a domestic violence situation, because the same abusers use the same playbook. That is one thing I have come really to see, is the way that it works out adjusts slightly to the size of the system, but the abusers use the same playbook no matter what the system is that they're working within. And so abusers target strong, capable, intelligent people with resources. They do, because that's valuable. They're trying to use the value that other people bring. But at the same time, they're trying to turn you into a person who is dependent, afraid, vulnerable. That's one thing that people need to understand, is if you know somebody who's been in a cult, it's not because they're a weak or less intelligent person. It means, number one, they had something of value that the abuser targeted and wanted. But then number two, the abuser saw their vulnerabilities, and everyone has them. For me, I had just come off of a serious illness. My life was in a lot of flux because I had had 9 years of a serious illness. And so I was in transition, and I was vulnerable because of that. And had I had any other intro to the group, I would never have been drawn to what was being offered. That's pretty typical. It may be different. It may be a breakup. It may be the end of a marriage. It may be, um, whatever, a job situation. That's a really common one, where somebody is offered their dream job, you know, or an opportunity to do good in the world, and they really care about that. And so they get into it thinking they're having one thing, thinking that they're going to make the world right in some way. And they get drawn in by somebody who makes grandiose promises. And then once they have you, it creates massive mental confusion, because practically speaking, your life is bound up with the community. It's very difficult to walk away from an entire community. And the LeBaron story, I mean, the family actually split because of the murder. And so there were branches of the family that didn't even know each other. And that's why Anna and Ruth, they had heard stories, but they'd never met. There were siblings who had never met. But it's very difficult when you have your whole life built around a particular community to walk away from that. If you meet somebody who has left a cult, you are not looking at a weak person. Strong people leave.
Yeah, that's right.
Strong people leave. And partly because strong people are also humble enough to admit they were wrong.
Hmm.
There's a very strong incentive once you have committed to a wrong ideology, even when you start to see the cracks in it, it's hard to admit you've been duped. And to have the humility to do that and to reconsider and to separate yourself, like that takes a lot of inner work, and it takes a lot of moral courage. And like in Anna's case, in some groups, you're looking at actual physical threat. Certainly that was true for anybody who resisted the Nazis or in North Korea or the LeBaron cult. So
or in
domestic violence
domestic
situation.
violence
Yes.
situations. So
Yeah.
we know that we can't, you've taught me a lot about this, but that we can't just tell people to leave. They
It's
know whether or
dangerous.
not it's okay for them to leave. They
Yeah.
see the danger.
Yeah. It is. Yeah. There's very real danger involved. And
Yeah.
yet having the courage to do that is important. It's
Yeah.
important for people to know that there can be something on the other side too.
Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to walk through a few of the references made, and we have some things typed up. So I am reading some, just so you know, in case you're wondering. Yes, I am reading some, but then we'll have a little conversation about it. But the first thing is Anna's book. So her book is called The Polygamist Daughter. And Anna was talking about her decision to publicly share her story after years of spiritual and emotional healing. She emphasized how long it took to process the trauma she experienced before she could write about it in any way that would help others. And here's what she said: "It took me 40 years to write my memoir, The Polygamist Daughter, because I needed to heal before I could tell the story." So the book, published in 2017, it tells her story of her upbringing as the daughter of Ervil LeBaron, a polygamous cult leader known for orchestrating multiple murders in the name of God. The book describes her escape, her healing journey, and her path to reclaiming her voice and identity. It's a very, very good and compelling story.
And Anna's situation and Ruth's are that they were born into this.
That's right.
The experience of someone who's born into a situation like that, or into a domestic violence situation, or into a totalitarian regime, is the shaping influences are different than for an adult that is drawn into that. And so the recovery, I mean, I'm not at all surprised that it took her 40 years to get to a point where she had unraveled things enough to be able to write about it, because her whole life had been shaped by this. Her identity as a child had been shaped by it.
I can't imagine trying to completely re-examine everything you've ever believed. I mean, I know that many of us have taken a step back from our belief system that we grew up with and have said, okay, wait a second, what do I really think? But even doing that is hard. I mean, she had to reconstruct it and understand it in a new way. And as we'll mention later, even after she got out, she was still susceptible and in another cult like situation when she was in school at a Christian school. And when both of us, Roseanne and I, are professing Christians, so we're not trying to just disparage like Christianity in general. We're saying there are things that we need to be watching out for in any religious, faith-based kind of situation, because this is such a different. There's
Well,
things that we have
it's
to be watching out for.
right. Well, one of the things that happens is like the whole story of the Bible is that deception came from the beginning, right? And distorted the good that God offered the people that he had made. And it's still true. It happens in religious environments all the time where there's deception. Anytime you have deception that distorts who God is and who his character is, it's going to end up damaging people who are made in his image. And so we have to be willing to talk about that. We have to be willing to look at that, both to protect vulnerable image bearers, but also to worship God as he is, instead of as somebody who's manipulating his name for their own power and their own ego and their own reason for control, like we want to oppose that.
Mm,
So
mm.
you have to be honest.
And here's the thing that I think gets really complicated and difficult is that you can be on either side of any kind of ideological divide, and you can hear the same message about the opposite group. So they want power, they want control,
Right.
they are distorting the message, they are whatever. And I think the key that we have to remember is that if you actually take a look at your own, the messages that you're hearing and the side that you're on, if you're looking at that with a critical eye and actually disagree with them sometimes, and actually see positive in the other side or understand why somebody would think the way that they think on the other side of things. Because if you can at least be able to see that, okay, there's two sides of the situation. If I am claiming that I am all right and they are all wrong, that I am all good and they are all evil, then most likely we are in a situation that is
You're in an echo chamber is what you're in.
Right.
Which is this, that's what cults do, is they create echo chambers. If you can't acknowledge, and that's part of the thing too, of it took 40 years for her to work her way out, because it comes out in layers. I think often people have the idea that you grow up with one mindset, you examine it as a young adult, and then you figured it out, right? And the reality is, hopefully, we're all continuing to learn and grow. None of us, even in that re-examining, like we don't have all the people, we may see some things differently, but in 10 years' time, I'm going to have more life experience. I'll have talked to more people. I'll have heard more. I'll have gained more information and more experiences that can inform what I believe. And it should shift how I think about things if I'm growing intellectually. And if I'm letting God speak to my heart, I should be growing. And so that involves shifting my opinion about things. And if I'm unwilling to do that, and I'm just adamant that I've got the package, that's a huge red flag. It means I'm not doing my own inner work, and I'm very vulnerable to being manipulated.
That's right. So I think that's one of the main things that if I could get anything across that I really think is important for both organizational development, personal development, professional development, spiritual development, the health of our, society, is that if we believe that everything is good versus evil and that evil is all on the other side and good is all on my side, that that's not conducive to a healthy environment and it's not realistic. And so it's super important that we are self-critical and both of our ideas, that we poke holes in our ideas. I mean, I remember one of the things about, when I wrote my book on Frozen, one of the main things that I really learned as a young adult was I had such strong opinions and I really wanted to be right. That was such a formative thing for me. I wanted to be right. I wanted that to be my identity, is that I was right and that I was strong and I was good. And so I had to be those things. And so when I went to seminary, I went to go find out what was right, because I was hearing, like maybe two conflicting opinions about things or feeling conflicted about something theologically, maybe that I was considering. And so I went to seminary to find the right answer.
The right answer. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. And that's a great idea. But what I found was that by putting myself up as someone who could be right all the time, I was acting like God. I was acting as though I was, I guess, my own idol in some ways. And that I didn't want to need God. I didn't want to be wrong. I didn't want to be weak. I didn't want to be vulnerable. because I didn't want to need anything else. I thought I should be strong the way that I am, and I should be right the way that I am, and I should be able to figure this out.
Yeah.
And so one of the main lessons that I gained in going to seminary even was seeing people who had different theological viewpoints on a similar topic at
Yeah.
the same seminary. You know, that was super helpful to me for being able to see, well, maybe being right doesn't have to be part of my identity.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that that is, to me, this seems like one of the key aspects that we need to be looking for in whether or not we're involved accidentally or susceptible to a cult, is whether or not we think that we're right about everything.
Yeah. Yeah. And the ability too, I think, to embrace the fact that two people can have the same goal and believe that there are different ways of getting there. I see this a lot in work with people leaving abusive relationships. You want them free, you want them safe, you want their children safe, but how to do that can look very different depending on the needs of the specific situation. And if you're locked in on repeating that, I've just lost a lot of weight. And one of the reasons the plan that I'm doing right now works for me is because it spoke to the specific things that were causing me to gain weight. Years ago, I talked to a coach who made some very she shared her weight loss story. She made some very judgmental statements about why people lose weight or why people gain weight. And when I tried to talk to her about what I knew of the specifics about how I had gained weight, she shut it down as you're just making excuses. And I think it's really important when you actually want to help somebody look at something to be able to not simply plaster your journey on top of their situation. Um, that's easier said than done. And I know, like, as a parent, right, when your kids come to you with stuff, you just want to like prevent them from going through things that you've gone through, and you just want to hand them the answer. But part of being the antithesis of a cult-like environment is giving people the space to come to different conclusions, to take time that you would prefer not be taken, uh, to go by a route that might not be what you would have preferred, you know. But we have to be able to give space to one another instead of assuming that our life is the blueprint for what's right. And because, like you said, otherwise we are making idols of ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, let's go to number two. We've been going already for a while. Well, we'll just see how this goes, right? Ervil LeBaron, Anna's father. So Anna was sharing who her father was and why his legacy still casts a shadow over her life and the lives of others. This came up early in the interview to provide background for her story and explain the level of danger and fear she lived with growing up. Anna said, "My father, Ervil LeBaron, was known as the Mormon Manson. He ordered more than a dozen murders, including members of our own family." So Ervil LeBaron was a fundamentalist Mormon cult leader and convicted murderer who led a violent polygamist sect in the 1970s. He claimed to receive revelations from God and used them to justify ordering the assassinations of rival leaders and dissenters, including his own brother. He was ultimately sentenced to life in prison, where he died in 1981. His legacy of violence and manipulation continued for years, with some of his followers carrying out murders long after his death.
One of the things that struck me about the discussion about Ervil was that he was very charismatic. And it's interesting how charisma can sometimes be equated with strength or goodness, and they're not the same thing.
Mm.
Having a charming personality cannot be a substitute for good character. And anytime you minimize character as opposed to how someone presents themselves, um, at some point you're going to pay a price for that. Charm is the hallmark of pretty much every cult leader. There's a skill at verbal manipulation. There's an ability to recognize what motivates people and to speak to that. But you have to look at actions. What does behavior match words over time? And a real mark of a cult leader is that a person's words and behavior don't match, but the followers still do mental gymnastics to try to make it match. They lose the ability to perceive what is real and what's not.
Making excuses or saying other people are lying all the time, that sort of thing.
A big part of a cult following is being unwilling to hear from sources outside the echo chamber, automatically assuming that they're of the devil or that they're lying or that they just don't have the inner knowledge that we have that makes us able to see the truth that they can't see. Anytime you have that kind of control of information, you are vulnerable to being deceived.
Hmm. Yeah, I think about that whole idea of charisma. It's tough. It's interesting because they appear. Maybe I should say that cult leaders appear to be, appealing and confident, and their confidence can be magnetic because they're so confident that if they show some sort of goodwill or like they like you, it feels really good. It feels really good when somebody who's really confident likes you and says that you're good. Yes, it's so validating. And also, when somebody who's that charismatic has like a little group and they're like, ooh, you're in the group.
Yes.
Dang, that goes back to, junior high or elementary school at the lunch table, wanting to feel like you belong. Of course, we all want that. And so I now am just really skeptical anytime somebody's particularly charismatic. And they might not be, they might not have evil intent, but I am automatically a little more like, is this genuine? Do they actually respect the people around them, or are they just saying what they want to hear so that they can get what they want out of them?
Yeah.
That's what I'm always asking myself now.
Yeah. Are the actions and the words matching?
And I think this is the other thing. Like I've recognized that I can be charismatic. I don't think I am all the time, but I know that have been times when I might come across as charismatic. And in some ways, when you're a speaker, if you're speaking in front of a group of people, that's what people are hiring you to do.
You have to energize an audience. Yeah,
you have to. Sure. So I personally am like, okay, when do I let this fly? And when do I hold it back? And how do I counteract that? So I'm not manipulative. So that, I don't want that. I don't want that. Anyway, so I want to acknowledge that is I think even for people who desire to be healthy,
ethical,
that we can still become manipulative, and we have to be very, very careful to go against that. And that the thing that I have been pointing to as what has helped me to understand, I don't think it's just me. I think there's an actual dynamic at play is when other people have agency. So if I make sure that the other person still has a choice, and I'm not saying things like, right, you agree with me, right? That statement at the end of sentences that people often make, or presenting choices and the options and not telling people that they're good or bad if they choose one of the options, like there's just certain things that I try to build in that would hopefully still encourage other people to have agency in the midst of everything, and that I wouldn't get into that position. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, yeah, it's challenging. I think one really good marker of whether a charismatic person is still a person of character is how do they treat people who can't do anything for them? I mean, that's where the rubber meets the road, because charisma is dangerous when it is used as currency for deal making instead of where everything about life is transactional, instead of being willing to just do the right thing, whether anybody goes with you or not, being willing to be kind, whether another person can do anything for you or not. Those are the marks of character. Character is doing what's right because it's right, regardless of the outcome, whether you win or not, whether you get acknowledged or not, whether the other person can do anything for you or not, whether it turns out well. You know, there have been situations where there have been people in bad situations that I've spent a lot of time and energy trying to help, and they had to have free will, and choices that they made were very self-defeating and damaging. And I had to let them. I had to let them make those choices. I had to let people go back to abusive situations and not try to force my will. Like, I had to let them, and yet still walk away from that and not think, oh, well, that was a waste. Like, that was a waste of my time and resources. You have to be willing to give because it's the right thing to do, and not because you're going to get a positive story or outcome out of it necessarily. So yeah, I think that's really important, what you said about making sure there's agency for the other person involved.
I wrote down your quote: charisma is dangerous when it's used as currency.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's going to be one I remember.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
The Daughters of the Cult Hulu docuseries. Anna was discussing her decision to participate in the Hulu docuseries and how it felt to share her story in a new format alongside others who had experienced similar abuse in high demand religious groups, and including her siblings. And her dad, by the way, her father had over 50 children with different women. And so she had many, many, many half brothers and sisters, along with her full brothers and sisters. Okay. So this is what Anna said. When Hulu contacted me about participating in Daughters of the Cult, I said yes, because I wanted to use my voice to help others understand what it's really like to grow up in a situation like mine. In the series, it tells the stories of women who are raised in this abusive religious environment, and it explores psychological control, manipulation, systemic abuse within these groups, while highlighting the survivors' courage in breaking free and speaking out.
It also, I thought, brought out two other things really strongly, because I had read her book, I had read Ruth's book. To watch the docuseries, I was actually surprised at how impacted I was watching it. But having her brother's voice there and seeing how the boys growing up in this, even though their men had more power than women did in the organization, the abuse that boys suffered in the cult was just unspeakable. That was one thing that stood out to me. But then the other thing that really stood out to me with the docuseries was that they kept saying over and over again, the people who did these things were really good, wonderful, kind people.
Yeah.
And the fact that somebody like that could take good, loving, kind people and motivate them to commit murder was eye-opening and chilling and really sobering. Really sobering, I thought.
Yeah. Just imagine people that you see around town this is like their experience. You see them every day. They're nice. You're having fun together. You laugh, you whatever, you live your life together. And then that person goes and shoots somebody in another town just because they've been told that God
God
says that this would,
wants them to.
God
Yeah.
wants you to do this. And
Yeah.
it's almost because they're so devoted that
Yes.
they're willing to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's hard to imagine, but it's real.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
I think sometimes we treat each other poorly in the name of God as well.
Yeah, that's the temptation, right? That you get to withhold kindness from certain people that have been designated as unworthy of it
Mm.
because of not adhering to of what you think God requires of people. On the one hand, like there are healthy boundaries, like when you're dealing with an abuser, where you don't give somebody access to harm you. But yeah, beware of anybody who tells you that compassion is weakness. Um, because you can motivate people to do really terrible things once you dehumanize certain groups of people.
Yeah. I know that the word empathy has been kicked around as maybe something that could be toxic. I've heard toxic empathy,
Right.
and I think there's something important here because I have actually talked about empathy, the potential of empathy being not dangerous. I don't think I've ever used that word, but not helpful at times. So, like, I think that there are times when I feel what somebody else is feeling because I'm with them and I see it. And that is natural for me to
Mhm.
experience what other people are experiencing with them. So I'll cry with people, I'll laugh with people. And while that can be really positive for building relationships and camaraderie and that sort of thing, there are times when I could potentially just do whatever they needed to make myself feel better.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I want to make that distinction that that isn't necessarily helpful. And I understand that. And that's something that I have talked about quite a bit over the years is that just because somebody else is struggling with something doesn't mean you need to come in and rescue them so that
Right.
you feel better. Like sometimes
Exactly.
people need to go through, like your child, you've got a
Mhm.
kid and they're learning how to climb up the stairs, and yeah, you don't want them to fall down the stairs, but maybe they don't need you to put their little feet on each or their knees or whatever on each little step. They need you to kind of stand and watch and be ready, but not necessarily save them.
Mhm.
And I think that's where I can say, okay, yeah, I can see what you're saying in terms of sometimes I don't think that's necessarily compassion. I think it's more saving ourselves. I think it
Yeah.
becomes selfish because we are trying to make ourselves feel better so that we want them to feel better so that we can feel better. But there's a difference between that and what you were just talking about.
Mhm.
Okay, so I'm going to
Mhm.
let you point that difference out.
Yeah, because I think you can listen to another person's perspective. You can care about them without necessarily accepting all of the framework of their thinking, but you can still care. You can care about them as a human. It doesn't mean you have to accept what they want or you have to solve it for them, like you said. But I think there is a difference between genuine care and a selfish desire to relieve our own discomfort. And honestly, what happens if that's what's going on? I think if you see somebody who gets irritated when they've tried to solve something for somebody else and it's not solved, that's a pretty good indication that what they're feeling is not compassion, but a desire to relieve their own discomfort. I think often empathy gets a bad rap because it's being defined in ways that aren't true. Empathy doesn't require us to negate who we are or what we think. It just requires us to see other people as fully human and worthy of kindness, and it resists the temptation to dehumanize, so that we would look at somebody else and want less for them than we would want for our own family,
Mm.
for our own selves,
I
you know.
think, years ago, I did an interview with a researcher named Christy Rogers. I'm hoping to get her back on the show soon, by the way. But she had written a Harvard Business Review article after having this research. And she was talking about the difference between respect that is owed and respect that is earned. Respect that is owed is human dignity, respect
Mhm.
for our human dignity,
Mhm.
and treating people like human
Mhm.
because we are human. Respect that is earned is based on what you've done or haven't done.
But even there, the conditions in which you're held need to be humane,
Right.
because you are a human
Human.
being with still um, value and rights. And here's the thing: when we fail to do that, when we fail to treat another person as respecting them intrinsically as a human, not respecting based on behavior, you can differentiate that, but respecting them as a human and caring for basic human rights and human decency of their conditions, if you fail to do that, you dehumanize yourself. You become something of a monster yourself. It is every bit as important for us to do this. Something in us dies
Mm.
when we treat somebody else as less than human.
And, I think part of the reason for that, if you believe in God creating every human and loving every human, then there is a certain amount of respect for human dignity that we do owe each other and we owe God.
The way we do or don't treat another person respectfully is actually saying what we do or don't respect about the image of God,
That's right.
about God himself. They're made in his image. And so we're choosing to or not to respect God when we treat an image bearer badly.
But dehumanizing and cutting people out of the respect that they're owed as a human being, even if they have done that to someone else. If we are going to live in integrity, then we will not do that back to them.
Yeah, after the at the Nuremberg trials, I remember reading that uh, one of the victims of a concentration camp began weeping as as he was watching um, various Nazis being tried for their war crimes. And when asked about it, he said, "I'm recognizing the potential within myself of being like them." He wasn't just grieving what he had suffered, he was seeing the danger of hardening his heart. Justice is love in action, holding people accountable for evil. There are people who set out to do evil. Even with them, it's really important for the sake of our hearts that we want them held accountable in a humane way. We need to be able to call their intention of doing harm what it is and not minimize it for the sake of their victims. But an example of this would be Larry Nassar.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at Rachel Denhollander in her victim statement, she very clearly both calls out the evil, the manipulation, the dishonesty with which he was presenting himself even in court, the way that he had violated, deliberately, knowingly, purposefully preyed on young women sexually who were coming to him for medical help. And it is very calculated, deliberate harm that he was doing. And yet, if you hear her victim statement, she did that without in any way denigrating him as a person worthy of respect. The way that she called out his evil, respected him as an image bearer who had a responsibility both to be accountable for his crimes and to be treated as a fellow human being. And that's a hard balance. We don't see a lot of models for that.
Yeah.
But if we're going to be better as a society, I think all of us have to work on that. That has to be something that we can do. And to be able to differentiate between somebody who's deliberately deceptive and people that just disagree with us. Not every disagreement is a source of evil. And people can even be wrong without being trying to be deliberately evil, you know?
Oh. Good point. And that would be Larry Nassar, the man convicted of sexually abusing many, I don't know how many hundreds of women, young women, who were going to him for, like you said, medical attention, because he was an Olympic gymnast doctor. Okay. The book, she mentions the book Under the Banner of Heaven by John Krakauer. Or did I say that right? Do you think?
Krakauer.
Maybe. Okay. So Anna was reflecting on how reading John's investigative book helped her to connect the dots between her own experiences and the broader history of religious extremism. Anna said, I read Under the Banner of Heaven and realized that so much of my life had been shaped by the same fundamentalist beliefs that fueled the violence in that book. So this book, 2003 nonfiction book, examines the roots of violence within Mormon fundamentalists' sects. It focuses on the 1984 murder of Brenda Lafferty and her baby daughter by two brothers who believed that they were commanded by God. The book explores how religious ideology, when taken to extremes, can justify violence and control. For Anna, this book validated her lived experience and helped her understand the historical and theological backdrop of her own trauma.
Yeah. And I remember there was a point in the docuseries that one of the statements that she made, I don't know if she made it in reference to this or just the general concept, that really kind of was a unsettling moment for me. But it was a reminder that when we believe something is part of our religious faith and we adopt that without interrogating it, we can end up doing things, maybe not as extreme as this, but we can end up accepting ideas uninterrogated that we believe are simply, it's just what God says. And we never question that. And we can go through various religious, it's easy to look outside and say, our religion is the true religion, therefore everything I believe is true. Because every religious faith believes that they have the true faith. And even if you do, it was still filtered to you through human beings. Like the way that you were taught was through human beings. And so it's very important to be able to not assume I have it right. Like this goes back to it again. Like assuming I have it right. And I don't, and for me to question anything is to violate my standing with God, like to not be respecting God. God can handle questions. The truth can handle interrogation. God doesn't have an issue with that. If you look at Jesus, he asked lots of questions. He invited questions as long as they're sincerely offered. Like the Psalms are pretty much full of that. But I think any kind of belief system that does not allow you to interrogate, particularly something that has serious ramifications for other human beings. If you can't question, if you have to assume that you already understand all there is to be understood, I think that's a red flag. I think that's a something that we have to look at.
Yep. I feel like we could go on to the next one, because this one, I'm going to tie back to this last one as well. So the next thing that she mentioned was blood atonement. Anna was explaining the theological beliefs that justified her father's violent leadership within the cult. And this came up when discussing the fear and control that shaped her childhood and the experiences of others in the group. She said, my father believed in blood atonement. That meant that he thought people who left or disobeyed could be killed in order to be made right with God. So, blood atonement, if that doesn't already kind of freak you out a little bit, blood atonement is a controversial and violent doctrine historically associated with some fundamentalist offshoots of Mormonism. It suggests that certain sins are so severe that they can only be forgiven through the shedding of the sinner's blood. While mainstream LDS officially disavows this teaching, which is important to note, it was referenced in early Mormon writings and later adopted by some extremist leaders like Ervil LeBaron.
And this certainly is not something that's unique. I mean, like using the phrase blood atonement may be specific to his branch. There are a lot of fundamentalist versions of various faiths. And I think that's one thing that should be pointed out when if we're going to talk about cult dynamics and abuser dynamics. Fundamentalism, and I'm not talking about doctrine, I am talking about a mindset of enforcement. Fundamentalism has more in common with fundamentalist characteristics of other religions than it does with the healthy version of its own religion. It's a psychological mindset that I'm talking about, not an orthodoxy, like doctrinal mindset, but a psychological mindset of enforcement and punishment and reward and the justification of harming those who do not adhere.
What does that fundamentally do? Keeps people in.
Yes.
Keeps people from speaking up and using their voice,
but
having a voice of influence.
Exactly. But the other thing that it does, and we've talked about this, is because it removes agency, it removes the agency to choose it as well, to choose genuine faith. It doesn't just remove the agency to leave. It removes the agency to choose genuine faith because it is coerced. And it's the same thing in an abusive marriage, same mindset that you run into this sometimes with men who will not they're like, we're supposed to be, marriage is supposed to be for life. She made a vow. I'll treat her like crap, but or I'm the father or I'm the mother, in a narcissistic parent. And how dare you, as my child, separate yourself from me? It's the same kind of punishment. You are not allowing the child to choose you out of love, or the spouse to choose you out of love, because you are forcing that they remain in proximity of relationship, whether they want to be or not. With the work that you do with Voice of Influence, agency and alignment is something you talk a lot about. And you cannot have a genuine love. You can't have a genuine faith. You can't have genuine collaboration
and an engagement
without the freedom of agency, of personal agency.
That's right. Not just to make the choice, but to actually act on it and make a difference and be a part of the conversation.
And in a pluralistic society, you have to make room for agency in other people who don't agree with you.
That's right. Which is crazy, because you think, no, I should be pushing my, agenda on everybody else because this is the right way. But you're not going to get them to do it willingly. So you're just going to force it on them, which means they're going to not engage. They're going to disengage, or they're going to resist in ways that are, and this again, we're not like, this happens on both sides of like the political spectrum too.
Sure.
Like if you're trying to push people into a certain belief system or category, they're going to resist. They're going to push back. If you threaten and try to make them do what you want them to do, they're going to, maybe they'll comply for a while. But you won't get the kind of engagement that is needed to really thrive and work well in the system together. Oh, I care so much about that. And blood atonement. Look, the idea that somebody has to pay for their sins, so you're going to take it in your own hands to make this person pay for their own sins of leaving or sins of not being in the group the way you want them to be. And by killing them, you're helping them to actually get into heaven. I mean, if you adopt that as a belief, then that you probably aren't listening to this podcast in the first place. You definitely haven't made it this far into this episode. But yeah, that's a really dangerous kind of a belief. All right, so we're going to cut this conversation right here because this is such an in-depth conversation that I really feel like we need to separate this into 2 different episodes. And so we will see you again next week with the next episode and finish this conversation that Roseanne and I started, this deeper dive in talking about the things that Anna LeBaron brought up in her interview. So thank you so much for being with us, and we'll see you very soon.